The Building Brands Marketing Podcast is dedicated to exploring the journeys of industry leaders who have successfully built a brand. Join me, Robert Breuer, president of Building Brands Marketing, and an entrepreneur who's successfully scaled multiple brands as we dive deep into the strategies, challenges, and insights that have shaped the success of industry leaders and provide you with the resources you need to do the same. Building Brands Marketing is a full-service marketing agency specializing in crafting customized marketing strategies for service-based businesses with a creative powerhouse to drive real results. Welcome to the Building Brands Podcast. Welcome to the Legal Leaders series of the Building Brands Podcast. I'm excited today to introduce Christina Perrone, owner and attorney of the Perrone Law Firm. Welcome, Christina.
Hello, good afternoon.
Happy to have you. So tell us a little bit about what makes the firm unique, Christina.
Sure. So the Perrone Law Firm specializes in child welfare law. Some of the things that make us unique are our inclusion of some very specific things in our practice, like a therapy dog that we like to promote and have him available when we're working with children, as well as with adult clients who maybe need to have a comfort animal available to them to talk about some tough stuff. We also have a child playroom in our office that you probably wouldn't see in a lot of attorneys' offices or in law firms, where we welcome children to come to the office, try to make it more conducive and more like an environment that they're familiar with when they have to do something that's maybe not so familiar, like coming and talking to an attorney.
Very neat. Since your firm is often appointed by the court, how do you balance being an advocate for the child while also working with the parents and other involved parties who might have conflicting interests in some cases?
Absolutely. It's very common, especially when parents are no longer living together, for them to have conflicting ideas about what might be in the best interest of their child. But because I am usually appointed by the court to represent either the child directly or to help ensure that the court does what's necessary to protect the child's best interest, I try to maintain that always as my primary focus. What in this particular case is going to be in this child's best interest? And then it helps to be able to kind of set aside what some of the conflicts between the parents are, and even sometimes help them to come to an agreement about some of those conflicts if we're always just focusing on putting the child first and making sure that the child's best interest is in everyone's primary focus.
That makes sense. You know, this is an interesting niche. It's I'm sure there's like some backstory to it. What inspired you to start your firm?
So it is interesting. I did not go to law school to be a family law attorney. I did not graduate from law school and immediately start practice in family law either. My husband and I actually did a foster care to adopt journey here in Texas, and we adopted 3 children through the foster care system and then a 4th child privately, but through a connection that we had made through the foster care system. And so after spending so many years kind of just tangentially involved in the foster care system, I knew that that was an area where I thought I could make a difference, and something that also continued to have a very strong passion for me and therefore drive for me to want to be involved in it. And so it was through that foster care process and that adoption journey that I decided to leave commercial litigation altogether and begin working in the foster care field.
Interesting. So your experience with the adoption kind of led to that career shift, the exit out of commercial litigation, your CPS prosecutor, kind of just had a windy personal path.
It was a complete 180. I mean, I was doing products liability, federal court litigation, trade secrets, breach of contract, aviation law. I mean, stuff that had absolutely no connection whatsoever to family law at all. But my husband and I didn't have children at the time either. And when we decided that we wanted to build our family through foster care and adoption and really try to make a difference in that field, it really just kind of ignited a passion that I couldn't put to rest. So I made that switch.
Yes, that's interesting. So there's like a really obvious personal connection there. How did that personal connection influence kind of your approach to your cases and clients that you worked with?
Well, and I think, I'm glad that you asked that because it's important, I think, to have that personal connection. I often say it's very difficult to sit in a room with a client or even as a mediator, with various parties in litigation and ask them to make tough decisions about their children or about their family or to help get you to understand what they think is in their child's best interest and why that may be different than what you came into the room thinking. Especially because I didn't birth my own children. And so it's almost like I've been in your shoes. And I've had to sit in those rooms where people are making tough decisions. And I've had to be a part of cases where we're asking other parents, birth parents, to make tough decisions about their children. And so I think because there is that strong personal connection, and I can legitimately say to many of the clients that we serve, I've been there. I've been in your shoes. I've been connected personally to a case where these decisions needed to be made, helps to put a little bit of their mind at ease to just know, okay, this is not some, big city attorney who's coming in here in my tiny little family law matter, turning my world upside down with no idea what that really means. Nope, I've been there. And I do know what I'm asking, and I do know what it means, and I felt it myself. And so it just kind of really helps to make that foundational connection.
Yeah, it sounds like that's part of your value proposition is this idea that, I've been there in those shoes, so I'm going to treat people. It's kind of like the golden rule, right? I'm going to treat other people how I would like to be treated if I was in that seat, which is cool, right? Like that at least you've identified that clear value proposition and what kind of methodology you should strive for in your quality of service that aligns with your core values. I want to kind of take a step back for a second and from a marketing perspective, talk about, what are some of the largest challenges you've had in building your brand and how did you overcome them?
Well, if you think about it, just globally speaking, I mean, what area of law do I practice? I'm a family law attorney. We're also a dime a dozen. And I know that. I mean, there's hundreds of us on any street corner, right? I mean, we've got billboards up and down the highway. We're as common as personal injury attorneys. So to market my firm and to make us stand out as something different than what you can get anywhere in a family law practice is a challenge in and of itself. There had to be something that made us different. There had to be something that made us unique and want to make clients try to work with us and see it from our perspective, right? And so that kind of goes back to why we incorporated some unique things like a therapy dog in our practice, a child visit room right here in our office to make children comfortable. But also it meant that I had to be willing to kind of put my own personal story out there sometimes and say, hey, I'm an adoptive parent myself. Hey, I've been involved in the foster care system and I know what that can feel like. Not certainly from everyone's perspective exactly the same, but there are some common threads there. And really it meant that I had to be willing to kind of open that door and lay that all out there so that people could start to make that personal connection with me.
Yeah, there's a challenge that I see in your marketing message because you're an amicus attorney, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So amicus attorney is not a term that everybody fully understands. I feel like the mass majority compared to a criminal defense attorney, most people are obviously aware of what they do. Myself personally, until I'm divorced and until I worked through the language of, decree paperwork and things like that, I didn't know what an amicus attorney was, but I of course knew what a family law attorney was. And at that point, of course I was educated on it, informed about it, so on and so forth. And the thing that I find interesting about an amicus attorney that I think creates a challenge from a marketing perspective with your particular firm is most people, in talking with you prior to today's show and in some individual research, I was under the understanding that most people aren't actively aware that they can basically proactively request an amicus attorney outside of court orders. Is that right?
That's right. Yep.
So I find this interesting because, most of marketing is lead generation. You're trying to capture your percentage of leads that are available in the marketplace, right? However, well, not most of marketing, but a good chunk of it is that. And that's the first thing people think of.
Sure.
However, what we're talking about here in the marketing approach of an amicus attorney is demand generation, trying to create demand for a service that somebody probably doesn't even realistically know they need. So that's a lot more challenging for me because there's a whole educational and informational component to the marketing funnel there that is outside of the norm compared to say like a plumber. Okay, I have a bathroom leak. It's pretty obvious the way that consumer journey works. So
Right.
how have you tackled this challenge in your branding and client outreach of creating this demand generation over just lead generation?
I think you touched right on it, and it's education, right? So we have to focus in our marketing a lot on making sure that we kind of step back from just saying call us, we'll do your divorce, to if you
Yeah.
call us, it's because we offer this special service. And you don't have any idea what an amicus attorney is if this is your first
Yeah.
divorce, right? You've probably never heard this word. And we still don't always agree on how we say that word. Some people still say amicus. I've always said amicus, right? So we can't even agree how to say it, much less what's the role? How do I ask
Yeah.
for one, right? And so education is what's necessary. And so I try to focus a lot of the marketing on just getting the idea out there as to what does an amicus attorney do? How do I talk to my own attorney about asking for one? Can I file a motion on my own, with my attorney and ask the court to appoint one? Or do I have to wait for the court to come to us and say, hey, I think you need one? How does that whole process work? And so a lot of that is just laying that general education for the general population. It also means letting other attorneys involved in the general practice of family law know, hey, we're offering this specialized service in your area. So that when they go to court and the judge says, I think I want an amicus attorney on this case, they've got my name fresh in their mind as somebody that they want to tell the court, I just got a brochure from Christina's office. I understand the Perrone Law Firm's focusing on that now. How about having her appointed, right? And so keeping that familiarity of our name tied to a phrase that people may not necessarily be familiar with. And that does definitely present a challenge, but it also kind of helps focus where do we spend those efforts.
Yeah, that's interesting. Are there any like particular marketing channels or avenues where you find they're most effective in raising awareness or education on what amicus attorneys do?
I think it depends on a little bit on who we're trying to reach. So, are we trying to reach the other attorneys in town to let them know that we're doing this? And that involves, in my mind, things like sending out newsletters to local law
Mm-hmm.
practices and letting them know, maybe what some of our great successes have been, or what different trainings we've been able to attend or speak at, even at different conferences, to kind of keep our knowledge base as amicus attorneys fresh and to keep our name fresh in an attorney's mind should the court bring up the idea of an amicus attorney. But it also means using just generic social media like Facebook, and our website and blogs to make sure that we're just educating the general public so that when their attorney says, I think the court might appoint an amicus attorney, and they go to their computer and they start Googling that term, our information pops up as to the education and what does that mean and what should I expect from an amicus attorney and what can I tell an amicus attorney. And so for us, that also means just having that information generally available on our website and social media and blogs.
Out of curiosity, I know you operate in some of these smaller rural counties around the Dallas area. What's the level of competition of amicus attorney? Like, how many firms are there out there that are pursuing this niche set of services?
Sure. So I would say, like in Dallas, Tarrant County, Collin County, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of attorneys out there that
Okay.
are qualified to be amicus attorneys. When you get a little further northeast, where I focus, kind of northeast of the Metroplex in general, it gets a little smaller,
Hmm.
more like a dozen. But we have to do different things to kind of set each other apart. And, to be fair, we specialize even in that amicus field. Some people say, I do great with teenagers. I focus more on younger kids. I like to keep
I
my
see.
practice area broad, and really feel like I can serve any children. But that's another way that, sometimes attorneys want to focus on how they kind of set themselves apart offering that amicus attorney service.
Interesting. Hmm. Well, you have done a good job finding a niche, narrowing down in that niche. When did you start the firm again, Christina?
It was 9 years on February 1st. So we've been open for 9 solid years, working on 10.
Congratulations.
Is there anything else that's been like a pivotal piece in growing your firm over the last 9 years?
I think realizing that there was something more specialized than just that general family law and just that general child welfare type law, and that there was something as specialized as amicus attorney, and saying, we can make a practice out of this. We can really run with this was kind of a pivotal moment for us as a firm entirely. And really focusing on offering that service, but also being educated on what that role means. And then also, to advocate for what's in a child's best interest, that means we're constantly having to learn what, social work is teaching us, what new therapy models are out there. What is science telling us about how the brain is processing trauma? What's the most current research in that area? Because if we're going to advocate for what's in a child's best interest, we need to have that, well-rounded base of knowledge. And so that was a pivotal moment to decide that this was what we were going to focus on, and then how to keep ourselves relevant in that field, right? And that just comes from doing a lot of things as an attorney I didn't think I'd do when I went to law school, right? I didn't know that that's, what law practice could consist of. But since doing this, I've loved every minute of it.
Well, it's interesting because so many entrepreneurs, not just attorneys, but entrepreneurs in service-based businesses, they hesitate to dial down in a niche because they're concerned, well, they might be turning a fair amount of business away. And we've all been victim of it, right? Where we're concerned about turning away business. However, the reality is, in the instance like this, you're defining a target persona, a target niche, and you're not saying you're exclusively performing work in that area. You're just making yourself can't say the word, certain words because of bar stuff, but you're making yourself a highly coveted person in that area, and your firm because you have experience in that specific area. I was talking to another attorney that's made a whole living in estate planning specifically for blended families. And that's a kind of a windy situation sometimes, especially when you introduce like a family like mine. I'm a blended family. I have special needs children. There's a lot of, different components there. It doesn't mean that person has to work exclusively in that space. But a lot of times when you define a target persona, it allows you to align your marketing strategies towards that specific target persona and target audience. It doesn't exclusively mean you only work there, but it means you can dial down and have a greater conversion ratio from that specific audience profile because the messaging aligns, the placement aligns. With marketing, it's so much more about what you say than where you say it. But I know in talking with you, Christina, prior to today, you've really built a strong reputation through word of mouth referrals from other attorneys in the area. And you've worked hard on kind of building that relationship pipeline over the years, whether organically or just, intentionally. So in a small town legal environment, which can have its challenges and its pluses, how do you cultivate and maintain those strong relationships across the board?
Let me say, you are right. A small town legal environment presents its own fair share of difficulties, right? I mean, you've got an office on Main Street in the middle of downtown, and people want to walk right in the door and expect to be served, right then. I've walked right into the attorney's office.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's very difficult to explain, we don't do criminal law. No, I can't help you with your traffic ticket. I'm very sorry somebody was injured in a wreck, but we don't do personal injury law. Well, your office is on Main Street. Don't you do everything, right? No, we don't. But I think working with other attorneys in cases to let them know, when we have big cases that have drawn out, what the result has been, even though nobody ever gets everything that they want, if the other attorney's clients still walk away feeling like they got a fair decision, right? That their voices were heard, that their child's voice was heard. That's an important way to let attorneys know and to have them want to come back to you. Because if an attorney consistently uses an amicus in their cases, and every time that attorney's own client walks away upset, well, they're not going to call me again, right? Because they don't want to constantly be putting themselves in a position where their clients are angry at them about something I've said or a position I've taken in court.
Sure.
So I work with those attorneys throughout any case, anytime we're working together, to make sure that they know where I'm coming from, what I'm thinking, what concerns I may have about their clients, Nothing about these cases is ever meant to be a surprise the day we show up at a final hearing. Nobody wins when that happens in a family law case. That's not good for the children. It's not good for the spouses or the parties that are separating either, right? And so I think, first and foremost, kind of being transparent in that respect and making sure that the other professionals we're working with kind of know where we're sitting so that nothing is a surprise to them is paramount to making sure that those relationships can continue long term.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you've also talked about, hey, you want to stay away from the large metro areas like Dallas. And I'm interested in learning more about that because our agency started out as a regional agency as well, and then we started to expand nationally. I see the pros and cons of both sides. I'm curious, do you see any advantages or disadvantages to keeping your practice more localized?
I think there are definitely some major advantages, which is primarily that I'm very familiar with the courts that I practice in because there's just a small number of them. And so, primarily I'm in front of 5 judges. That's it, just 5 different judges. I know what their line of thinking is. I've sat in enough cases in their courtroom, whether I was a attorney involved in the case or just waiting for my next hearing to be called, right? I've been in their courtrooms often enough to kind of get my own opinion about what I think evidence would be that's important to them, what kind of information they want to know before they make a decision in their case. And that's a huge advantage to keeping that practice area small. But for example, if I added something like Dallas and Collin County, I would be tripling that number of judges by just adding 1 or 2 counties. And that makes it a whole lot more difficult to know the ins and outs of those courtrooms or how those judges find certain information to be, more relevant. They're certainly always there to hear everything that's relevant to the case. But by being there frequently, you kind of get a better idea of, well, I know for this judge, this particular bit of information is really important to know. Let's be sure that we get that out there quickly. Or, I know this judge is not going to be as inclined to consider that relevant. I appreciate it's a concern for you, but our court's not going to think it's a concern. So what else can we focus our time on? And that's really the huge advantage to keeping the practice area small. Now, the disadvantage is that I'm in a small practice area. Small practice area means small number of cases, right? And so I've done exactly like you were saying a little bit ago, where not only have I specialized my family law practice, I've specialized the area. Oh my gosh, have I specialized myself right out of work, right? Will I be able to get enough work to keep paying the bills and keep, this doors open? But it's worked. I have been able to without issue. And so I don't see any plans to change that anytime in the near future.
Yeah. And, it all comes down to people's goals and objectives in the long term. The more specialized you are in many cases, adds additional value, meaning you can potentially charge higher rates, things of that nature. Right. So I'm a huge believer in work smarter, not harder, if you can. But obviously you're in this line of work, not just to make a living and not just to make money, but because you have a passion. It's very obvious in that. I am curious, if there were any advice that you wanted to provide another budding entrepreneur, law firm, doctor, owner of an HVAC company, what would that piece of advice be?
I think you have to find your passion. And I know lots of people think, well, but I do HVAC, but I am just a plumber, and how do I find a passion in doing that kind of work? That's a valuable, necessary service, right? Find that part of that work that you're passionate about making sure. Do you want to be the HVAC guy who can come in and make repairs on older systems instead of charging elderly homeowners thousands of dollars for new ones all the time? Great. Make that your passion, right? Do you want to be the general practitioner doctor who can see everybody in town and that's where you're passionate about? Fine. Or do you want to be the one who focuses on seeing newborns and, young children because you're very passionate about the pediatric world? I think that in every kind of professional environment, you can still find that specific area that you're passionate about. And when you're passionate about it, I think is what, at least in my perspective and for me personally, gives me the strongest drive to work hardest at it. I want to know everything there is to know about it. I want to be available and, correct in the things that I'm telling people I think are concerns or valid concerns or the suggestions I'm making for how a situation could be better because I'm passionate about it. I want to be right about it. And because I want to be right about it, I'm encouraged to learn about it and, continue kind of changing my approach to those things. And so I really do think it really comes from finding that area of your career that you think you could be passionate about. Focus on that. Let that fuel fire.
Definitely. That translates in product. We have a core value. Our last core value is called executing with passion. The idea is, hey, when you execute with passion, that end result is to the customer experience in a positive way. Kind of rounding, look back at your own journey through the years. If you could over again in building your brand, anything you would have done differently, Christina?
I don't think so. Every step along the way, no, it's not. But those hiccups along the way throughout the process got us where we are, and successful at this point. I don't know that there's anything that necessarily changed. Maybe I would have faster. I certainly sometimes doing commercial that I was not passionate about. Frankly, I got experience as a young attorney, very senior, very strong trial attorney speaking into me during that time. And so while maybe the type of law wasn't something I was passionate about, the knowledge I was getting and the practical experience I was getting is still invaluable today. And so I don't know that I would change any of it. But I think getting where you're passionate as fast as you possibly can is really where it's at.
Understood. Well, where can our listeners or viewers find you online, Christina?
So we're at PerroneLawFirm.com. And then on Facebook, we're at Perrone Law Firm. You can check us out on either one of those. We've got blogs on our website that people are welcome to read through and connect with us if they feel the need to reach out and inquire further about our services.
Awesome. Thanks, Christina. What you heard today, be sure to like, share, subscribe to the Building Brands podcast. Christina, you offered some good insights today. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you very much.